It is now time to hear Donnie D'Amato. He is a DSW Design System Wednesday regular at this point. It's always a pleasure to have him around. He's currently a principal engineer and designer. I'm not sure. He's a principal at GoDaddy, and he's also been working on Design Systems House, his own project, I think, which he might talk more about. I don't want to spoil anything. But without further ado, thank you so much, Donnie, for taking the time, being here, dropping some knowledge on us. Yeah, the time is yours. Take it away. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Maria. And you could hear me, right? I think this should be fine, right? Good. Okay. Let me share my screen here. I'm going to find the right one. Okay. Everyone should be able to see token operations on the screen. But yes, as Maria said, my name is Donnie D'Amato. Before I begin this presentation, I wanted to kind of announce something that I've been working on with some other community members, and that is DS events, ds.events. Design System Wednesday was featured on the site up until this morning when the event started. So if there's any design system related events that you know of, please try to add them to the site when you know of them. And again, it's located at ds.events. There's different ways of connecting. You can connect to your calendar and RSS feeds and things like that. And this is going to be, I think, a really great place for all of our community to come together and learn and attend events just like this one on a regular basis. And there's events all over the world, whether they be remote or in person. So please take a look at this, at your leisure. But let's actually talk about the topic of today's talk for me today. It's token operations. This is a project that I've been working on for the past couple of months, and I really think that it's going to solve a lot of the problems that have been discussed in the design tokens community group, and really just unlock a lot of different opportunities. So to get started, I have a little bit of an exercise here. I want you to imagine that you've been tasked with supporting this new brand for your product. So imagine that the product that you're in today, and whether that's a dashboard or some sort of maybe events application, and some new brand is going to go ahead and provide a private label for that experience. Maybe it's Home Depot or McDonald's or NASA, and they have their own colors and topography and all these other different values that they would have to describe their personality. Okay, so just imagine, you've been given this task, and one of the things that the stakeholders are going to ask is, how long is that going to take, right? How long is it going to take to make our current product look like their brand, right? And I'm sure a lot of wheels are turning in there and thinking, okay, well, we have X number of tokens. Wow, that's actually a lot of tokens. Oh, we don't have anything to support this particular, way that they're doing color. Maybe we have to do something else. And there's a lot of different, kinds of things to think about. So I was wondering about this personally. So I sent out a survey in the community, and I got some responses from that survey. And it's just a short survey, a couple of questions, how many tokens do you have in your system, and how long, something like that might take. And gathering all that information up, running some numbers, basically there's one number that pops out that I think is kind of interesting. And it's 1.39 TPH, and that's tokens per hour. Okay. So what does that actually mean? That means on average, it takes about an hour and 20 minutes per token to determine what the value is supposed to be. That's what I call curation, right? You're basically looking at a token name and saying, what is this value supposed to be in the current scope of what I'm working in, right? So maybe the primary color for McDonald's is like that McDonald's red or the Home Depot orange. Like that's probably an easy color to maybe think about. But there's probably a lot of tokens in your system. In the case of the survey that I did, we're talking hundreds of tokens. And actually, if you're looking at some of the more popular systems that are out there, there's a lot of tokens. And I actually kind of did a little bit of a calculation here to determine how long would it take potentially to update IBM Carbon's design system to look like NASA. And it takes maybe about a little less than a week because they only have 100 tokens from what I've researched. But for a system like Spectrum, that could be pretty daunting. But on average, we're thinking about maybe a sprint's worth of work, right? We're talking about, again, somewhere around 300 tokens, and at that TPH number of 1.39, 1.4, we're talking about a little over an hour per token to figure out what that value is supposed to be. And that's a lot of time, right? That's a lot of time that we could be using for other things, right? Doing those audits to figure out exactly what's supposed to be in their system in the first place. And I imagine that you can think of lots of things that you'd rather be doing than supporting, the Burger King brand on your site. So the question for me really is how can we make this better as an experience? How can we reduce the numbers that we need to curate to make it more efficient and still get a solid result out of it? So that's the kind of stuff that I think about. My name's Donnie D'Amato. Like I said earlier, I'm a design systems architect, among other things. And this is the kind of thing that I really sink my teeth into. I really enjoy thinking about not the day-to-day of design systems, but really where we could be in 5-10 years if we kind of got out of each other's way and really just let the systems kind of do the work for us. And I think this area where we're trying to reduce the number of tokens that basically influences the larger UI is an opportunity for improvement. And this area actually has been kind of explored already before in lots of different tools. One of those tools that I found a while back is Microsoft Fluent's Theme Designer. So there's this tool that's out there that you can use to kind of curate colors for Microsoft Fluent, which is their design system. And what it provides is this area up on the top left that allows for 3 colors to be chosen. So you can choose a primary color, you could choose a text color, and then you could choose a background color. And those 3 colors will then inform the parts of the UI in appropriate ways. So you can imagine, again, that Microsoft doesn't have just 3 color tokens. They definitely have much more, dozens, in fact. And on this page, you would actually be able to see them enumerated below after you choose those colors. Because what happens internally inside of the site is that there's calculations that are run. So they're taking that primary color and then maybe desaturating a little bit or upping the brightness or doing some other computation to get the states for maybe the primary button, right? So the hovered and the chosen, stuff like that. So they're able to take those 3 values, mix them together in different ways and different kinds of transformations to then cover the entire UI, right? So the dozens of tokens are reduced down to 3. And you can imagine this being a very inclusive experience for theme making, right? You could have someone from the marketing department that needs to make, I don't know, a Halloween page very quickly by just choosing the orange and black and white to then create a new personality for a couple of marketing pages. And they don't really need to bother anyone by trying to remember to cover the entire UI, all the inputs and alerts and all that other stuff. It just kind of happens. And that experience, I think, is, again, really powerful to, folks to open them up into trying new, ways of painting a UI or displaying a UI, showing that personality. There's a problem with this particular tool, though. Actually, maybe a few. One of the first things is that, a marketer wants to have lots of different controls. And granted, the Microsoft Fluent Theme Designer does have additional controls for individual values at the bottom, but it's only color. You can't change typography, as an example. If I wanted to make the title bigger, I would have to wait for a developer to update the UI in order to get typography tokens to be read inside of this interface. So I don't have all of the knobs that I might need to then completely portray my brand. So that's no good. And, of course, is there an opportunity to improve there? Certainly. But generally speaking, you're only as good as the UI here. What if you wanted to add elevation? That's another time that you're kind of waiting to add that feature. So that's one of the problems. And then another problem is that all of the calculations that are occurring to determine what, to turn the primary color into some hover state, that exists here in the UI's system. So once those tokens are exported and put into whatever service that you're running these tokens on, whether it be a Figma or the web, you lose all those relationships. They're gone because you'll have to have a flat file at the end and to read from and to then, render on pages and things. So those relationships can't exist. They'll just have they'll just exist in this tool. So I think it would be a lot better for us to maintain those relationships so that you know where these values came from, and not necessarily needs to bring all those values back into this tool just to make a small change, right? Maybe even want to change the way that stuff is calculated. And that would also, require you to go back into the tool and update all of your themes again. So there's some areas of improvement here. And I think another tool that's actually improved greatly in this area is Token Studio's Resolver. I saw a demo of this, I think, earlier this year, and it's a very, very powerful tool. It's able to create, token sets and scales from single values, able to do conditional tokens, so you can do color contrast, lots of different things you're able to do in this tool. It's just, I think, what a lot of people are asking for, because it is solving that problem of reducing the number of tokens that you need to curate, right? If there's only a few dozen or less tokens that create those color scales and those topography scales, elevation, spacing, whatever, you have a lot more time on your hands to just do the next thing. But there's just one criticism that I have with Token Studio, and it's not something I don't think that is necessarily a problem for them as much as it's, I think, a problem for the community, and it's their output. The output for the Token Studio Resolver is enormous. It's overwhelming, and it's not meant to be human readable. And they've told me this. It's meant specifically for their ecosystem. But this is the output that figures out all the node connections and what those values are, and really, provides that graphical interface and just keeps those connections. And, I understand the purpose of it. I understand that this is, what that system needs. But, I think this is the one drawback to this particular system when we're talking about adopting it for the community group standards, because this is going to be hard to be a standard, I think. I think one of the fundamental pieces that I'd like to see in the community standard is for it to be human readable. So that's really like my foundational kind of moment that I'm thinking about, is I want to understand how we might be able to maintain the relationships, right? The things that the Resolver are doing and the Fluent Designer are doing, those relationships of saying this primary color relates to this hover state. How do we maintain those relationships and those transformations, but keep it in a human readable manner? I want to still be able to go into that file and understand how we got that value. That's the final kind of step that I think the Resolver is missing, and of course the Fluent Theme Designer is missing. So in order to do that, I think this is a couple of the goals that we need to hit. Like I mentioned, I want this to be legible. I want to be able to get in there, not be overwhelmed by what I see, and understand what's going on. I want it to be portable so that if it's accepted as a community group standard, it can go, these files can go to Figma, to Adobe, to PenPot, to any of your tools, that's the web, and still get the same output every single time. And then finally, of course, customizable, right? I want to make scales. I want to make border radius systems and things like that. I want to do whatever my mind comes up with, okay? So that's where I got the idea of token operations. So again, token operations is kind of an addition to the existing token design tokens community group spec. And in order to go over that a little bit, I need to talk about some code. Now, for the designers out there or people who haven't seen code, it's just JSON, and we're not going to be doing any really deep dives into it. I do have a couple of posts that talk about more about the deep dives. The README for the project also has a lot of deep dives, but just to get some of the fundamental key points, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the spec and then what's kind of being added to it a little bit. Okay. But also something to kind of know about this as well is that this approach is very much code adjacent, meaning that when you're going to be creating these kinds of operations inside of the tokens files, they are closer to code than they are really to just assigning a value somewhere. So in most cases, you'll need to either be code comfortable or working with the developer to kind of do token operation stuff. But let's start. This is a very simple example of what a design token looks like in the spec today. So you have a name, which would be font size 2. And then you have two special keys on that. One of those special keys is $type, which represents the type of value that this thing will be. And then, of course, $value, which represents the final value for this token. So that's a very simple example of a token in the spec today. Now, what my proposal is adding is the ability to add this new special key called operations. Now, this isn't my idea. Actually, it was something that was brought up in another issue, but I basically took that idea and ran with it, and boy, did I run. But the operations key would be an array. And in that array would have different kinds of collections of values in different ways. And I want to kind of go over a couple of ways that you could use this. And you'll notice some numbers at the top of the screen for the next couple of slides. These numbers relate to the GitHub issues in the community group spec where token operations would actually solve the problem that they're discussing. So in this particular example, we're talking this idea of multiple aliases. So in the community spec today, there is this idea of being able to reference other tokens in the same file to then, again, kind of use them elsewhere. It's very similar to the idea of having a base token, which would be maybe like a color red 500, and then using color red 500 in another token, maybe like text error critical or something like that. So you'll be referencing that token. That's what the token aliasing is. So that's in the spec today. That's totally something that I think the community wants as a whole. But one of the issues is that folks want to kind of take two aliases and make a new alias from them, or a new value from them. So the token operations proposal does that. You can go ahead and reference multiple aliases. And in this particular example, I'm doing a concatenation on those two values as they're coming in. So that would solve that problem there. Another problem that's come up is custom units. In this particular example, issue 218, one of the things that someone wants to do is have a base kind of font size value that represents the number 20 in this particular case. But the units that are used across platforms are different. Maybe it's REM for one place and DP for Android, or whatever it might be. You're able to concatenate in this particular example again to add units or other things to these strings to produce these new values. And actually this relates to another issue, which is platform-specific tokens, right? So you can actually create this like nested structure where Shadow 1 has a CSS representation, which has its own operations to figure out what the value is, and then an Android representation to figure out what those values are. So you would be able to, kind of get the right value every time based on some earlier aliases in the file, right? And those earlier aliases is, again, very similar to the way that Microsoft Fluent would do it, where you'd have a few, values at the top of the file that's like, controlling all the other values, and they just kind of get, propagated throughout the whole file. So I think that's, one of the things that it'll solve. Another really cool thing that token operations could do is the ability for conditional values. There is a technique in order to make these things conditional. So the package that I'm going to be talking about a little later, which produces token operations, has a few kind of custom things that allows it to import operations. So one of those features is basically sometimes the operations can be really, really involved and complex. And it's really important, especially for me making, these kinds of features, to have them reusable so that you don't need to copy, 12 lines of an operation over and over and over again just to like change the hex color to something like, added opacity or something. So to have one line that has reusable operations is really powerful. And the package has a couple of like boilerplate ones. And again, the binary if string is an example of one of those things that could be reused and allowed for. So future possibilities here as well. The specification doesn't, or my proposal, I should say, doesn't have an answer for this currently right now. I didn't build that feature yet, but there's a possibility of importing tokens. So the idea here is that maybe you have a colors JSON file, a topography JSON file, a spacing JSON file, because you want to keep those things nice and organized, but then the actual theme that represents Home Depot needs to import those tokens from different places, or vice versa. And I think that token operations, because it has that import functionality, could import those tokens from these different places so that you can keep these files neat and tidy, as opposed to having these huge nested files of all these different kinds of variations of tokens. So I think that would be really helpful as well if people are, of course, interested in that. And I think there is eventually interested in that. So with that and all the issues that I think we're solving, I think, when you read the actual nitty gritty of this stuff, it could be said that it's legible. I think that's definitely up for interpretation, because the only issue that I have in the GitHub today is actually that it says that the syntax is too complex. And there's a reason why the syntax is complex when you actually read into it. Ultimately, it's important to me for us to be able to make our own customizable stuff, which is, of course, the last goal there. But in order to do that, there is complexity involved. We need to basically remake a language to be able to do whatever we want. If we were to just say a keyword alpha to create an alpha, that raises questions about how that alpha gets computed, agreement about how that alpha gets computed inside of the specification, and then adoption of how alpha gets computed across our tools, right? I relate that to the same way that, the CSS selector hasn't been in production across all the browsers until today. Actually, it was in Firefox nightly last night, and it should be in today, which is very exciting as a side note. But we have to wait for our vendors to adopt, the new responsibilities of the spec. And if we're waiting for alpha to come out, and especially if that alpha calculation isn't to our liking, we're kind of stuck again. So making it customizable kind of requires a little bit of complexity. But again, if you're familiar with programming languages, I think it would be legible. But again, portable, if it's part of the spec and it's adopted across, I think, that makes it portable and, of course, customizable. I really believe you'll be able to do anything, including what we've been talking about. Because before, just to return back to what we were talking about earlier, before token operations, we're talking hundreds of tokens that are taking days, if not much longer, to curate. And if we were able to just alter just a few tokens, and I'm going to go ahead and just, a tenth of what we have to manage, we reduce the number of hours drastically, right? We could spin up in some cases something that looks like Home Depot for our product in an overnight time, or less than a sprint's time, and iterate on that, right? We can go ahead and tweak those little tokens here and there afterwards. But at least to get something that's usable quickly, I think is super powerful. It just will take some time to go ahead and make those calculations and make them right for you. But that's the customizability part of it. That's the thing that's really, I think, the most engaging part of this whole thing, is really customizing, making it feel the right for you, right? Maybe the saturation calculation needs to be adjusted for our purposes, and maybe this one that I'm importing from another package is just fine. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So if you'd like to try today, it's at NPMI Token Operations. There's the NPM page for it. At the bottom of this page is a link to the GitHub issue that talks about this. It's all the way at the bottom. There's lots of right here at the bottom is the issue that talks about token operations. If you're interested in giving some feedback or just putting a rocket emoji saying that we should ship it, that would be cool. And I hope that this gets up front as a solution to a lot of the problems that the community is trying to tackle today, including, of course, just making more time for us.